Alright, so in this video we're checking out a new racing flight stack from a new company. Never been seen on the channel before. They're called Oxbot. You can see their website there on the packaging. This is the Champ Racing flight controller. They're a new company. This is the only product that they have on their website right now. I don't have much to say about the company because they're pretty new, but just from first impressions on just the packaging and I did take a look at the flight components briefly. This is already opened, and the quality seems to be pretty good. I would put it on par with something like a Gep RC or an iFlight. It definitely is a lot better than, say, like a Darwin FPV or Happy Model, which is more budget oriented. Now, of course, this being their first product, they're targeting racing pilots. Not sure if my audience is necessarily in that sort of target group of top racing pilots. This is really targeted towards those folks. So, if I'm mistaken, if you're one of those top racing pilots out there, or if you're a pretty frequent FPV racer, let me know in the comments. I don't really hear much from you guys in the comments, so I'm not sure how applicable this product will be for you. Obviously, these specs are more high-end and probably overkill for those of you that are more casual pilots and freestyle pilots. But that being said, we'll go ahead and we'll sort of give you an overview of everything that's on here. They wanted this video published on a certain date, I think July 8th, which is less than a week from now. And so, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of claims and specs and stuff that are going to be mentioned here in this video that I have no way, or just don't have enough time to do proper testing on this. And these are parts that are meant for like a 5-inch racing build. And the only frames I have that are 5-inch racing are for 30 by 30 stacks. And this is a 20 by 20 stack. So it's, again, minimal weight size for those high-end racers. So again, I'm not sure when I'm going to have an opportunity to actually do performance testing on this one. Probably sometime down the road, maybe in a month or so. And you'll probably see a video on that over on my second channel. So with that being said, go ahead and get into the two boxes here. First off, they did send these LED light kits here, and these are meant to go on like the bottom of the arms for racing. Of course, I guess it gives visibility of your quad to the pilot that's behind you, so then when they're in a racing situation, they're not flying and hitting you. So that's for visibility. And they sent me two of these because I have two stacks. Now, it's basically the same stack, but there's two versions of the stack. So there's it's basically a different IMU or gyro. So this is the ICM 42688 gyro version of the flight controller, and then there is the MPU 6000 version of the gyro. So the MPU 6000 version is a little bit more expensive. Probably gonna get the prices wrong here off the top of my head. I think this is $130, and I think the ICM version is $116. So a little bit cheaper for the stack versions. You can also buy these components individually, just the flight controller or just the ESC. The ESC is this new type of firmware. It's called the OX32. They have developed this. Oxbot company has developed that in-house. It is supposed to be similar or an improved version of the BL32 ESC firmware, and it's 60 amps, 4-in-1. I suppose with the BL32 project going up in a belly up, there's going to be a lot of 32-bit firmware out there for ESCs that will make a lot of claims about it being better, improved, etc. Of course, there's no real way of knowing that until you fly it. They do claim that a lot of racing pilots have tested this before they sent this out for review. There'll be some videos linked in the video description of pilots that have actually flown this stack. So if you want to see this in action, I'll link those down in the video description so you can have an opportunity to see for yourself what you can, it's hard to say what it looks like just based on someone else's flying, because I always base my reviews on how it feels and in the air. Now, some people claim that the MPU-6000 gyro feels better than the ICM gyro, especially in a racing situation. For me personally, I'm not a good enough pilot to make that difference or notice the difference between the two gyros. It really depends on the tune as well, because they will be tuned a little bit differently with the two gyros. So a lot of, sort of apples and oranges there. But some people will claim that the MPU-6000 definitely feels better, quote unquote. That's why it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive. So go ahead and get this out. Very good documentation in the packaging here. So this is a lot of, basically it's, you have lots of information, it's well diagrammed. They do have a PDF version. I'll show you that here in a second. So if you can't read the tiny print here, which is actually kind of, it's not printed that well, so it looks blurry. As you can see, it looks like it's blurry in the image, but it's actually printed funny. But there is a PDF version of this that you can download, and if you can't read this tiny print, you can just download the PDF version. But it's comprehensive documentation, both in the box in terms of paper form and also electronic form PDF versions. So, definitely a plus there in terms of the brand and what they provide. But I'll show you the PDF here in a second, because that's probably going to be a little bit easier to see. Of course, they always provide stickers. Every brand seems to have their own stickers. That's common. Got your QC card here. This has obviously been checked by somebody. And here is the flight controller. This is the MPU-6000 version. And when you look at the board by itself, you can see it's conformal coated, and on both sides. And they are using these thin connectors here, and you can see that they're sort of recessed back away from the edge of the board. All the connectors are like that, so that typically with a lot of connectors that are on the edge of the board or maybe kind of sticking out, they tend to break off in a crash. And of course, in racing, you're going to crash a lot. So these boards are designed to handle a lot of crashing. And same thing here with the USB-C port. They have shaved back part of the metal casing here, so it's recessed away from the edge of the board. As you can see, the chip, the internal chip there is actually sticking out, which is you usually never see that. It's actually on the inside. So this USB-C port isn't sticking out as well. In a crash, that's not going to cause any potential issue with the USB-C port getting pulled off in a crash. But you can see it's nicely conformal coated. It's got 5 volt and 9 volt BECs on this side here, and then you can see there's some soldering pads. They're very tiny. On this side, you got your this is your bootloader button there. And I heard that one of these buttons also controls the LEDs. You can also connect this to this BDB app. It does have Bluetooth on board, so if you don't want to connect the USB-C port to your Betaflight, you can also use your phone to configure the settings. And yeah, I mean, overall the design looks very nice. It's very well in terms of the coating. It looks like it's overall very high quality. They did a pretty good job in terms of putting together a nice board. Now you can see now this is what I like all the soldering pads on top, so it's easy to solder, but then the connectors are on the bottom, which is better. Since sometimes they put the connectors on top and the soldering pads on the bottom, which is really annoying, because if something needs repair, you have to take the board out to get underneath it. In this case, the connectors, you just have to, they're just there, you just connect it in, no problem. You get these very thin rubber grommets there, so the whole stack is going to be very thin as well. So it's meant to be very compact. I mean, obviously in a 20 by 20 size. And they even have these little pads here on the edge. Not sure how I feel about that, because they are kind of sticking out. I assume that you're going to probably be using a smaller camera. So, typical setup here, this area here is probably where the camera is going to be, and they have sort of given a little more space here. So in case of a crash, the camera might come back and it won't necessarily hit the board. But if you're using one of the bigger cameras, like maybe the 19 millimeters, then maybe these protrusions are not ideal for that. You're probably going to want to go with the nano camera in that case. But yeah, overall looks really nice, you know, especially for a first-time product from a first-time brand. And of course, no one really knows how this is going to hold up. Of course, in the end, we'll have to see. And here is the 60 amp 4-in-1 EC with that proprietary OX32 firmware, and which, by the way, you can configure it via a web browser interface. So they have actually a website. It's called ox32.oxbot.com, and it's a web-based ESC configurator, which is kind of nice. Really unusual for a new brand to just come up with all this stuff right off the bat. So they must have been working on this stuff for some time before they have actually released this product. Very nice solder pads here on top and also on the inside, so you can actually solder onto the side there, which is what most people will probably do, and then there's not necessarily on the bottom. But here's the bottom of the board. Got that same thin connectors sort of recessed back. Can solder directly to the pads on the top here for the motor wires, and also on the side. So it's all very nice. Really big solder pads for your battery connector. And so you can do probably the capacitor on this side, and then the main connector here on top. And again, they got these thin grommets here, so this whole thing, so let's see what this looks like. There's probably going to be, yeah, I think there's going to be some extra grommets inside the accessory box. I'll have to dig that out. But yeah, looks really nice, and just appearance-wise. Alright, so here are all of the other accessories. These are these thin connectors. So this one here is obviously going to connect the flight controller to the ESC board, and then you have some other connectors here for other accessories, probably maybe for a receiver. But again, for me personally, I would probably use the soldering pads for most of the stuff, and as few connectors as possible. Here are the mounting hardware. So you got some interesting, so they have some M3 screws for mounting the flight stack. So you can just, I guess these shorter ones are just for the flight stack if the VTX is somewhere else, and these longer ones if you're going to be mounting the VTX on top of the flight stack, as well as these shorter standoffs. And then you have these lock nuts. So very nice hardware. And then you got this is, what is this, XT60 with a capacitor there, and it looks like, yeah, you can, it's got a little 3D printed part there to put them all together. I guess if you can use these shorter ones, or they have some longer wires here if you want to use some longer ones as well. So different options there. I think, I guess most racers will go for a really short connector there. And here are those extra grommet spacers there to space out the stack, as I was expecting. So this is the other version, the ICM version. I'm just going to show you the board really quickly because everything else is the same. And just to show you that, I think the boards pretty much look the same. So the one over here on the right is the MPU 6000 version, and the one on the left is the ICM version. So, and they are labeled, so you can see clearly where the gyro is. But yeah, they pretty much look the same. Board layout is the same, just a different gyro. Let's look at the bottom here. Yeah, I don't see any differences between the two boards. And then the ESCs are going to be the same between the two stacks. Okay, so here's the PDF version of the manual, and it is very comprehensive. I think this one that came in the packaging is technically a quick start guide. Yeah, so this is technically a quick start guide that's here in the paper form, it's in the box, and then the PDF version is actually a full manual. So I'm just going to go over the specs real quick here. I'm not going to cover everything, so feel free to pause the video if I skip over anything important. But basically, the main processor, the MCU on both the flight stacks are going to be it's an H743 chip, obviously Betaflight firmware. The ESC firmware is OX32, which we don't know a whole lot about, but 60 amps. And this is the ESC flight firmware configuration. See the website there. 3 to 8S on this one. So I originally thought it was 6S, but yeah, of course 8S is now a thing. So obviously they need to support that 20 by 20 mounting, of course. And then here are the size specs. It's very light, 21.3 grams. And then here's the diagram on the dimensions. You can see the flight controller is very thin, very tiny, and overall very light. A little overview on the stack installation with those little spacers. Going to probably need that to match to your whatever frame you're putting it in. And of course they have the wiring diagrams there on what's what. A little overview of everything that came in the package, which I already showed you. And again, here is the full layout there with what is what on the flight controller. So again, you can just download the PDF file yourself to find out. But there is an LED on here, and you can see the battery voltage range right on the flight controller. So there's those LEDs right there, and it would be right there where my thumbnail is. So if you want to see the battery voltage indicated via these LEDs, you can see right there what the green, yellow, and red mean right there. So it's a good way of quickly looking at your battery voltage without having to put your goggles on and look at the OSD. And a quick look at the wiring diagram for your receiver and other peripherals and accessories. Of course, it'll work with all your typical analog and digital VTXs out there, so no worries about that. And here is the diagram for the LEDs. But yeah, it covers pretty much all the different air units. Here's like a Vista, for example, how to connect that up. And yeah, so I'm not going to cover everything in this manual because this would just be a way too long video. But yeah, they have very detailed documentation on how to get this to work with whatever setup you have. So I wouldn't be too concerned about not enough documentation. Now, another plus about this brand, Oxbot, is they provided a bunch of additional overview information for the reviewers. And I'm not going to show you every little thing here, but they do have some pricing there. So $129 for the MPU 6000 stack, $116 for the ICM stack, and then the prices for the different flight controllers. Obviously the MPU 6000 is a little bit more expensive, and then the ESC by itself is $70. And they also provide all of these key features. So yeah, I probably talked about some of this stuff already, but yeah, one of the things about this brand compared to say someone like a Darwin FPV is they provided all of this really detailed information, and Darwin FPV usually provides zero information, so you're kind of left on your own as to figuring out what's what, and they almost never answer my questions. So something to be aware of. But this company is very responsive have been very responsive to my questions. They just didn't provide me enough time. Usually I would like a couple of months to do proper testing, but a week and a half is just not enough, unfortunately. Yeah, this was another thing that I thought was interesting. Obviously, only testing will reveal if these OX32 ESC firmware will actually do zero desyncs. And of course, their ESCs are supposed to be sort of crash proof, so it's more crash resistant. Typically, when you crash a lot, what usually happens is the ESCs fail, or some sort of failure in the ESC causes desyncs, and then that puts stress on the motors, and then the motors fail, or vice versa. Something happens, you smoke a motor, and then the ESC gets smoked. But this ESC is supposed to be a little bit more sort of robust and can handle things like preventing desyncs and handling crashes without causing a lot of damage. Yeah, they even show some photos here of this installed in a racing quad. You can see here, it looks like it's an HD0 VTX, and these are the wires for the LED lights on the arms, and that's what that quad looks like. Unfortunately, I don't have a quad like that. And here's what they showed that diagram of what the LEDs look like on the bottom of the arms. So yeah, bottom line here, overall, I think in terms of the brand, my first impressions of the brand itself, just based on looking at what they provided and looking at the parts here, I say, thumbs up so far. Only time will tell if these will hold up in actual use. And of course, for my particular type of flying, I don't really put that much stress on parts. So I'm probably not the best reviewer in terms of seeing if these are going to hold up through tons of crashes. So again, I'm going to refer you again to those videos down in the video description to other pilots that do race that have used these parts, and you can see how those perform and make your own judgments on that. But I'll go ahead and put a link to this down in the video description if you're interested in checking it out. That'll do it for this video, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.